Okay, hello everybody. I feel like I've learned loads on the last couple of sessions about how we might think about getting some of this ocean work out in the world after this, and I'm also really conscious of the time and those drinks on the balcony. So on that note, I'm going to whiz through this, or maybe not. Okay, so Valuing the Ocean. As I said earlier, it's a programme that is focused on helping to build collaboration and communicate the value by which we mean everything that matters about the ocean more effectively. When we set up the programme, we did some initial scoping research about what the needs and gaps for marine conservation might be. And there are lots of challenges, as I'm sure you all know, facing the ocean. But what emerged was underneath all those challenges was the need to make the issues human. In other words, really to be able to help people understand why the ocean mattered to them. And another challenge was there's lots of information about the ocean, lots of people doing amazing work, but tends to be very siloed. So this issue of building collaboration became important. So we've really focused the programme around those two things. And over the last 5 years, we've supported new collaborative approaches, one of which is the Marine Collaboration, which I think Heather talked about briefly at the beginning, which brings together organisations with a diversity of skills, interests and areas of expertise, exploring this question of how to shift the narrative on marine conservation using what they call a values-based approach. And it's interesting how often values has come up this afternoon. But what they mean at its very simplest by this is understanding where people are and building on shared ground. And what we've also been doing is commission some research into how the UK public thinks about the ocean and marine conservation issues from the Frameworks Institute, which we published last year. And what you see is Getting Below the Surface, which is what the report's called, identifies some significant gaps between expert and public understanding of the issues and some more, or in many cases less, useful frames or conceptual models for the way the public thinks of things. I don't have time to go into them all, but just some very brief headlines. The good news is that the public has a vague sense of the it's all connected model of the ocean, which is that somehow it's part of a globally connected and vital ecosystem. So framing messages that kind of strengthen that neural pathway are really useful. On the other hand, there's the vast other world model of the ocean, where it's this amazing, mysterious, huge, vast thing, which nothing we can do or throw at it will harm or change. So that's obviously really unhelpful if we want to talk about what the impacts on the ocean are. People see the ocean as a source and sustainer of life, the place where life on Earth began, and continues to be a source of life for the planet, which is helpful. But a lot of people talk about the ocean as a source of resources, and the danger of that frame is that it then triggers lots of ideas around consumption and exploitation, which are really unhelpful. And there are some interesting findings, particularly I think for the conservation sector and the way we're messaging. So one is that the public has a really strong and they're very impressed by this, what they see as a heroic activist model. So these amazing NGOs out there, they go out there, they risk their lives, they save the whales or whatever. And that's fantastic, and they really admire that, but that's not something that they can do or will relate to themselves. And there's also a spotlight on individual species, whether it's penguins or polar bears, which is great in some ways, but it sort of undermines an understanding, broader understanding of the need to protect the functioning of the whole ecosystem. And overall, as has been said earlier, what comes through the research is this strong fatalism and apathy. It's all too big, it's too difficult, it's too late to do anything. It's worth saying the research was carried out in the latter half of 2016, so it'd be quite interesting to see if the blue planet effect would have changed any of this. So it's one thing to publish the research, another to ensure the findings are accessible and used. And over the last year, we've been sort of thinking about that and doing a variety of things to share the work and help people to use it. We launched it at a big collaborative one-day event last year, and we've been particularly working with the organisations in this marine collaboration group, and they've done things like setting up a blue comms network to really work with the comms people in the organisations and in other organisations to share experience and approaches, and potentially to build collaborative campaigns. And we've recently published this top 10 infographics, top 10 tips infographic, which summarises the key recommendations in the report. And I think there were copies at the back if you didn't see them. And we're just beginning to think about what the next steps are. And one of the things that we'd like to do is to support a kind of dedicated comms post that would really help to take this work forward. However, what we found is some of the findings do challenge traditional communications. To give just very briefly 2 examples, the first one is about crisis language, and the recommendation is to avoid crisis language and images, which tend to reinforce this sense of apathy and inaction, and instead connect people to an understanding of meaningful action which is commensurate with the scale of the problem. And it's not just about the sort of individual necessarily recycling or whatever, it's really understanding what the kind of larger system solutions are. And the second is this idea of, I mean, I've used it myself, the kind of idea of the vast, mysterious ocean. But rather than talking in those terms, to really zoom in on the complex, rich biodiversity, to reinforce this understanding of the whole ecosystem interacting and dependent on itself. And I guess it's worth saying more useful frames are about creating and reinforcing the conditions for long-term shifts in understanding and behaviour rather than quick wins. And I think that, there are trade-offs, and perhaps that's something that we'll talk about later. So, organisations are putting some of the findings into practice in new campaigns and initiatives which are framed to promote positive connections between people and the ocean. And again, I don't really have time to go into these, but this is some of the logos and behind some of the campaigns and initiatives. And finally, last but not least, so we're really sort of halfway through this process. The Frameworks Institute is busy developing and testing new frames and metaphors for communicating about the ocean in the UK as we speak. This gives you some ideas. MPAs, for anyone who doesn't know the acronym, is Marine Protected Areas. We should have final results from this early next year, and there'll be resources and workshops and bespoke training to share the resource. But I think something that's come up a number of times and we're really kind of conscious about is how do you sort of work with other organisations or across the sector to be really reinforcing helpful, positive frames around the ocean and around the environment more broadly.